Snow fell like ashes over the churchyard, soft and endless, muting every sound except the low hum of the choir within. Through the warped glass of the church window, golden candlelight flickered against lace veils and polished boots. Inside, a wedding bloomed, roses, laughter, champagne, and outside, Elena May stood barefoot on the frozen boards, a chipped tray trembling in her red hands. The smell of roasted meat drifted out when the door swung open. A young bride tossed her a glance as if toward a servant, not a girl her own age. Elena lowered her eyes. Her breath fogged in the cold air as she stacked empty cups. A man inside joked loud enough for everyone to hear. Pretty thing like her and no dowry. Shame God makes beauty so cheap. The laughter that followed was sharp as ice. The tray slipped from her numb fingers, clattering against the steps, startling even the church dog asleep beneath the railing. She knelt to gather the pieces. Her fingers shook, but she smiled to no one, pretending it didn't sting. Snow gathered in her hair like a small mercy. Behind her, the door closed again, sealing her outside with the wind. The bell tower struck 6. The sound carried over the empty street, over the frosted shop windows, and into her hollow stomach. She had worked since morning, sweeping floors, serving tea, pretending not to hear the whispers. Mrs. Clay, the dressmaker's wife, had said it first months ago. "No one marries a poor girl. Not here." The phrase had stuck like a splinter in every tongue since. Elena's mother was buried 2 winters back on the hill above town, a small wooden cross lost to snow. Her father had gone chasing gold in the mountains and never returned. All she had left were her hands, her quietness, and that golden hair people said looked proud for someone with no money. She straightened, the tray pressed against her chest for warmth, and watched her reflection ghost across the church window. Inside, men toasted, women danced, and the bride's white dress shimmered like the snow she stood in. When she finally turned away, her footprints trailed toward the road like fading proof she existed. She walked past shuttered shops, past lanterns glowing weakly behind frosted glass, until she reached the edge of town where the wind carried no music. Her thin shawl clung to her shoulders. Her breath came short. A horse passed, its rider not bothering to look down. Somewhere, a door slammed and laughter spilled out, warm and cruel. Elena paused under the sign that read, "Mercantile," its paint peeling, and touched the window. Inside hung the same wool coat she'd once dreamed of owning. She whispered, half to herself, half to the dark, "I could have been a wife. I can birth babies. I can love." The words fogged the glass and vanished. Her stomach ached. The snow deepened. She walked toward the bridge where the creek ran black beneath its crust of ice. Every step sank deeper. Every gust lifted her shawl like a sail. Yet something inside her refused to break. The small, burning belief that someone, somewhere, might see her worth. From far off, a wolf howled, low and lonely. She glanced toward the hills, where pines swayed like dark sentinels. The mountains loomed, vast and indifferent, yet she found comfort in their silence. Maybe, she thought, the world beyond this town held no gossip, no shame, only cold air and mercy. Her legs gave out halfway across the bridge. She sank to her knees, clutching the tray still in her arms. Snowflakes landed on her lashes. Her lips moved, praying without sound. A single tear traced down her cheek, freezing before it fell. She leaned against the wooden rail and closed her eyes. Time blurred. The wind howled. Somewhere in the dark, footsteps crunched. Steady, deliberate, too calm to be town men. A shadow moved along the bridge's edge, broad and tall, framed by snowlight. Elena opened her eyes. At first she thought it a dream. A man walking bare-chested through the storm, skin bronzed and steaming where the snow touched it. His hair was long, tied back with leather, and around his neck hung a carved bone talisman. An Apache. The sight made her breath hitch. The townsfolk told stories, savage, dangerous, not human. Yet this man's eyes were steady, amber in the white storm, and they held no threat, only a quiet, unreadable sorrow. He stopped a few feet away, studying her like she was some wounded creature blown off course. She tried to stand but slipped. He caught her arm gently, his palm rough and warm. For a heartbeat she saw the faint scar across his shoulder, the kind that spoke of battles survived in silence. "You'll freeze," he said, voice low, careful, as though testing each English word. I don't, she began, but her voice broke into a cough. He lifted her without effort, the tray clattering to the bridge. She felt the heat of his skin even through the cold. Snow swirled around them, blurring the line between man and winter ghost. He looked down at her face, eyes narrowing not in anger but recognition, as if something in her mirrored a pain he knew well. Then, without asking, he carried her toward the pines. The world fell away in white silence, broken only by the rhythm of his steps. Behind them, the church bells rang again, distant and hollow, marking another vow Elena would never witness. As the forest swallowed them, she clutched his arm weakly. Why help me? He did not answer right away. His breath rose like smoke. Finally he murmured, because the snow cries when it takes someone who still wants to live. She didn't understand, not then, but his voice settled into her like a promise. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was the faint orange flicker of fire through the trees. His home, or perhaps just warmth borrowed from the wilderness itself. And somewhere in the storm's hush, the town's laughter faded, replaced by the sound of her own heartbeat, weak but refusing to stop. The poor girl no one would marry was being carried through the snow by the man everyone feared. By dawn, only her footprints remained on the bridge, half buried in white, leading toward the forest where a new story waited. When Elena woke, the world was orange and breathing. Firelight trembled along the walls of a small cabin, its warmth breaking through the cold that had buried her bones. For a long moment, she lay still beneath a thick pelt, trying to remember how she'd come here. The smell of smoke, pine sap, and wet leather filled her lungs. Somewhere outside, the storm still raged, its distant roar softened by timber walls and care. She turned her head. The man sat near the fire, shirtless, his skin glowing like copper beneath the flames. He was sharpening a knife, slow and steady, each motion precise as prayer. His hair hung damp to his shoulders, dark against the pale furs beneath him. When he glanced up, the reflection of the fire danced in his eyes, amber, alert, ancient. For a heartbeat, fear returned. Stories of raids, of scalps taken and settlers vanished, crowded her mind. Yet he made no move toward her. He only nodded once, as if greeting a frightened deer that had stumbled into his den. You live, he said quietly, his English rough but soft in tone. Her throat burned when she spoke. You carried me. He set the knife down, motioned to the fire. You were ice. Elena pushed herself up, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. Why help me? He stirred the embers with a stick, not looking at her. Because the snow kills what it loves. It takes the gentle ones first. His words unsettled her, not the meaning, but the knowing in them. She studied him through the smoke. Scars marked his chest like old rivers, crossing muscle and memory. On his left wrist hung a strip of blue cloth, frayed at the edges. She wondered if it once belonged to someone he'd lost. I have no one, she said, voice breaking like thin ice. The town turned me out. I saw. He looked up now, his gaze steady, without pity. They look at you the way they look at me. The truth of it silenced her. He rose, moving with quiet power, and ladled broth from a pot into a small tin cup. Steam rose between them as he knelt and handed it to her. His hand brushed hers, rough, calloused, steady. The touch burned warmer than the fire. She drank slowly. The taste was simple: rabbit, salt, and something smoky. You live alone? He nodded. Cabin is my brother's. He went to the spirit world last winter. I'm sorry. He shrugged, emotion both proud and weary. He walks in dreams. Sometimes I hear him laugh when the wind is right. Silence followed, comfortable, like snowfall over tracks already forgotten. The fire popped, sparks leaping upward. Elena watched the flames dance across his face, softening what the world had hardened. You have a name? She asked finally. He hesitated, then said, Sahel. She repeated it, careful with the syllables. Sahel. The sound of it lingered between them, gentle as a promise. He looked almost startled to hear it from her lips. And you? Elena. He nodded. eyes flicking toward her golden hair catching the light. "Elena," he said, slow and deliberate, like testing how her name felt in his mouth. For the first time in years, she smiled without meaning to. It was small, fragile but real. Outside, wind clawed against the shutters. The logs groaned. He rose, went to bar the door, and she noticed how his shoulders bore the cold without flinching. When he sat again, he gestured toward her shawl folded by the fire. "Tomorrow, Storm will sleep. You can go back." The words landed heavy. Go back, to where? To the whispers, the scorn, the same door that closed on her face? "There's nothing for me in that town," she murmured. His eyes lifted slowly. "Then where will you walk?" "I don't know." "Then rest," he said simply. "Decide when the light comes." She lay back, pretending to sleep, though her thoughts ran wild. The crackle of fire mixed with his steady breathing. Through half-lidded eyes she watched him tend the flames, careful, deliberate. He placed another log, then sat cross-legged, whispering something in his language, short, rhythmic, more feeling than sound. It didn't sound like prayer or spell. It sounded like grief spoken gently to the night. Elena turned her face toward the wall, pretending not to cry. For the first time since her mother's death, someone had given her warmth without asking anything in return. It frightened her more than cruelty ever had. Hours passed. The wind faded to a low moan. She drifted between dreams and waking, catching fragments. His silhouette framed by firelight, the rise and fall of his chest, the faint scars that told a life of endurance. At dawn, pale light spilled through the cracks in the shutters. The storm had indeed slept. Snow lay heavy on the pines outside, glittering under the new sun. Elena stirred, blinking away sleep. Sahel was gone. For a moment panic pricked her chest, sharp and childish. Then she saw the tracks, 2 wide footprints leading toward the stream. Beside the fire he'd left a small wooden bowl of berries, and a folded piece of fur for her shoes. She touched them, the gesture wordless yet full of meaning. He'd gone to hunt, or maybe to see if the path home still existed. Elena rose, wrapping herself in the blanket. She stepped outside. The air bit her skin, but the world was clean and silent, the kind of silence that feels like forgiveness. Down by the creek, she saw him, a dark shape against the snow, kneeling to fill a pail with water. He looked up when he sensed her. No smile, no greeting, only that calm, watchful expression again. And in that quiet glance something passed between them. Something that asked nothing, promised nothing, yet felt like the start of both. She took a step toward him, her bare feet pressing into the snow. He rose slowly, the morning light crowning him in mist. "You're awake," he said. "Yes," she whispered, though her heart added, "and I don't know who I'll be now." Above them, the pines swayed, snow sliding from their branches like old memories shaken free. The creek kept whispering its secrets between them. And though the sun climbed higher, neither moved closer nor away. 2 strangers caught in a warmth the fire had only begun to name. By the time the storm lifted, the world had turned to glass. Snow shimmered across the valley, and the sun, pale as milk, spilled over the peaks. Smoke curled from the cabin's chimney like a sigh. Elena stood by the window, watching her breath fog the glass, her hair loose around her shoulders. She had borrowed Sahel's coat. It hung heavy on her frame, smelling faintly of cedar and smoke. He moved behind her, silent as the wind. "The path clear?" she asked without turning. He nodded. "Town's half a day walk. Snow soft now." She hesitated, tracing a fingertip along the windowpane. "They'll talk if I return with you." "They already talk," he said simply, tying a strip of hide around his arm. "Let them." Something in his tone, neither defiant nor apologetic, made her chest tighten. He was not ashamed of being seen with her. The thought both steadied and frightened her. They set out before noon. The forest crackled under the thawing sun, pines dripping cold tears. Elena walked beside him, their footprints twin paths through untouched snow. She tried not to notice the strength in his stride, the quiet grace in how he moved through the world, belonging to it in a way she never had. When the town came into view, her stomach twisted. Smoke rose from chimneys, church bells rang, and the same frozen faces awaited them like ghosts she'd hoped to leave behind. She could already hear Mrs. Clay's voice echoing through the mercantile door. "That poor girl's gone savage, mark my words." Sahel paused at the edge of the main street. "You stay. I bring food." "No," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "They'll say worse if I hide." He regarded her a moment, then nodded once. "Walk proud, Elena." The wooden planks of the walkway creaked beneath their boots. Every head turned. Women stiffened. Men narrowed their eyes. Children gawked, whispering. Sahel's presence drew their fear like fire draws shadows. He was bare-armed despite the cold, his bow slung across his back, his gaze calm but unflinching. They entered the general store. The room went quiet except for the tick of the wall clock. The shopkeeper, a thin man with spectacles, cleared his throat. "We don't serve." He stopped when he met Sahel's eyes, voice shrinking. "What'll it be?" "Flour. Salt. Soap," Sahel said. The man moved stiffly to fetch the items, his hands trembling. Elena stepped forward, laying 2 silver coins on the counter. "He saved my life," she said quietly. "You'll take our money?" A woman by the stove snorted. "Saved your life, or took it?" Laughter rippled, small and cruel. Elena's cheeks burned, but she stood her ground. "He carried me through the snow when your men wouldn't lift a hand." The shopkeeper avoided her gaze. "Folks talk, miss. People don't understand. People don't try." Her voice cracked, but she didn't back down. Behind her, Sahel said nothing. He only gathered the supplies into a sack, his face carved in stillness. As they turned to leave, a drunk stumbled from the saloon across the street, his coat unbuttoned, his grin too wide. "Well, I'll be damned," he slurred. "Little golden-haired angel's gone and found herself a redskin protector." Sahel stopped. The man swaggered closer, breath sour with whiskey. "What's he pay you, girl? Pelts? Bones?" Elena flinched, but before she could speak, the man reached out, catching her wrist. The moment his fingers touched her skin, Sahel moved. No noise, no warning. His hand gripped the man's wrist, twisting with effortless precision. The drunk cried out, knees buckling, the sound echoing down the silent street. Sahel didn't strike him. He simply let go. The man stumbled back into the snow, clutching his arm, pale with shock. "Enough!" Sheriff Grant's voice cut through the stillness. He'd stepped out from his office, broad-shouldered, gray-bearded, hat pulled low. "Let's not have trouble." Sahel met his gaze. He touched her. Grant's hand hovered near his revolver, but his eyes softened. "I heard. No one's dead, so let's keep it that way." Elena looked at the sheriff, pleading. "He did nothing wrong." The sheriff sighed, weary. "I know, Miss May. But you know this town, they don't take kindly to what they don't understand." Mrs. Clay appeared from the doorway of the dress shop, arms folded tight, voice sharp as the wind. "A decent girl wouldn't be keeping company with his kind." Elena turned to her, trembling but resolute. "A decent girl froze outside your church while you danced." A hush fell. Even the horses along the hitching post stilled. Sahel reached for her hand, a quiet gesture, neither possessive nor bold, just steady. The warmth of it steadied her breathing. Grant stepped forward, his tone softer now. "Miss May, best you head back home. Snow's coming again." She shook her head. "Home? I don't have one." Sahel lifted the sack of supplies, speaking for the first time since the confrontation. "We go." As they passed the saloon, whispers followed them like shadows. Some spat into the snow, others watched in silence, uncertain. A few, mostly the old, simply bowed their heads as if shamed by what they'd witnessed. When they reached the edge of town, Elena stopped and turned. The steeple stood tall against the white sky, bell silent now. She could see her reflection faintly in the frosted window of the general store. Pale face, golden hair, eyes no longer downcast. "You regret?" Sahel asked, voice low. She shook her head slowly. "No. But it hurts to see how small their hearts are." He nodded. Snow shows what's buried. They walked on, leaving the town shrinking behind them. The road wound between hills, quiet except for the soft crunch of boots. The air smelled of wood smoke and frost. When they reached the ridge, Elena looked back one last time. From that height, the town looked almost peaceful, as if its cruelty could not reach them here. But deep inside, she knew it would follow, in words, in stares, in the invisible walls people built. She touched the edge of Sahail's coat where it brushed her hand. "They'll come for us," she whispered. He didn't answer at first. The wind moved through the trees like a warning. Finally he said, "Then we will stand." The simplicity of it sent a shiver through her, not of fear, but of recognition. The fight was no longer just against cold or hunger. It was against shame itself. The first snowflakes began to fall again, thin and slow, settling on her lashes. She didn't wipe them away. Ahead, the path disappeared into white, but she followed, one step at a time, until the town was gone and only the sound of the falling snow remained. A quiet applause for two souls who refused to bow. Snow fell again by nightfall, soft and relentless, burying the path behind them. The cabin waited in silence, its chimney thinly breathing smoke into the white sky. Inside, the fire glowed low, painting the walls in slow orange. Elena moved quietly through the dimness, hanging her damp shawl near the hearth. Her fingers still trembled from the town's cruelty, but her eyes held something steadier now, resolve. Sahail placed the sack of supplies on the table, and knelt to untie his boots. He said nothing. The only sounds were the wind pressing against the walls and the slow, rhythmic pop of burning pine. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but she heard the weariness beneath it. "They hate what they fear." She turned toward him, hair loose, cheeks touched by the fire's warmth. "And what do they fear?" He met her gaze. "A world they cannot own." The words sank deep, and for a long moment, neither moved. The air between them shimmered with the quiet intimacy of two people, standing at the edge of something neither dared to name. She broke first, her voice small but steady. "If I go back, they'll call me worse names than before." "You will not go back." "Then where will I belong?" she asked, almost whispering. Sahail stirred the fire with a stick, eyes reflecting the flame. "Here, until you find your path. Or until you wish to leave." Elena sank onto the bench, her hands clasped in her lap. "You speak as if I have a choice." "You always have choice," he said. "Only the snow takes it away." She smiled faintly at that, though her heart tightened. "You talk as if the snow listens." He looked up. "It does." They shared a silence filled with the sound of wind, dragging its fingers across the roof. Somewhere outside, a coyote cried. Elena's gaze drifted to the wooden carvings on the mantel. Animals, feathers, faces shaped from cedar. Each one told a story she couldn't read, yet she felt their presence watching gently. "Your brother made these?" she asked. Sahail nodded. "He carved them to remember the old ones. When he died, I burned one for each season." "Why burn them?" "To keep their spirits warm." She lowered her head, thinking of her mother's grave buried under snow somewhere beyond the ridge. "My town prays to forget. You carve to remember. Maybe that's the difference." He studied her, the lines of his face softened by the firelight. "You carry too much sorrow for one winter." "I was born into it," she murmured. He stepped closer, his shadow crossing hers. "Then let it melt." Her throat tightened. The way he said it, like an invitation, not an order, unraveled something she had kept knotted for years. She rose without realizing, standing before him. The firelight flickered across her golden hair, turning it to amber. "You think I can?" "I think you already have," he said quietly. Her breath hitched. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering near her cheek, but never taking more than she offered. That restraint, so deliberate, so reverent, moved her more than any tenderness she had ever known. "I don't understand you," she whispered. "You don't need to," he said. "You only need to feel safe." Her eyes closed briefly, overwhelmed. "Safe," she repeated, as if testing a word foreign to her tongue. "I don't even know what that means." He nodded once. Then stay until you do. The fire dimmed. He added another log, the sparks rising like fleeting stars. She watched his hands, strong, scarred, patient, and thought of all the hands that had pushed her away, hands that had taken, never given. His were different. His built warmth instead of walls. Later, she brewed tea from dried leaves he'd gathered, the scent earthy and unfamiliar. They sat across from each other, sharing the quiet like a fragile pact. You could leave, she said softly. You could let me fend for myself. I could, he agreed, eyes steady on hers. But I won't. Why? He didn't answer. Instead, he looked into the fire, where the wood hissed and cracked like breathing. Because when I found you, I saw someone who still looked toward the light. Most people stop. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. And what do you see now? He turned his head toward her. The same light. Only stronger. Something in her broke, not into pain, but into softness. The tears fell silently, tracing the corners of her mouth. Sahel reached for a cloth and handed it to her. She took it without speaking, their fingers touching for the briefest second. Outside, the storm rose again, a low whisper building into a roar. The cabin shuddered, snow sweeping against the door. Elena stood, pressing her hand to the wooden frame as if to hold it closed. Sahel moved beside her, his presence grounding. The snow is angry tonight, he said. Then we'll face it together. He glanced at her, surprised by her tone. She met his gaze, steady, unafraid. You said I have choice. I choose this. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened in a way that made her knees weak. They barred the door, fed the fire, and sat side by side on the floor. The wind howled like a wounded animal, but inside there was warmth, a fragile, defiant flame holding its ground against the endless white. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quieter, but clear. Sahel, do you think the world can forgive two people who don't belong anywhere? He looked toward the window, where snowflakes streaked past like ghosts. Maybe the world doesn't need to forgive us, he said. Maybe it just needs to see we're still here. The storm answered with another gust, rattling the shutters. Elena leaned her head against the wall, closing her eyes. The sound of his breathing beside her steadied hers. And as the firelight played across their faces, she whispered something he almost didn't catch, soft as falling snow. Then I promise I'll stay until the snow stops crying. He turned to her, but she had already drifted to sleep. Outside, the wind calmed for a moment, as if listening. Then it carried her promise into the night, across the mountains, where it waited to be tested by the dawn. At dawn, the world held its breath. The snow had stopped falling, but the silence felt wrong. Too heavy, too still. Elena stirred awake to the faint sound of boots crushing ice outside the cabin. She sat up quickly, heart lurching. Sahel was already by the window, bow in hand, his body still but alert. Through the narrow gap in the shutters, she saw them. 4 men on horseback, rifles glinting beneath the pale light, their horses blowing steam into the cold. They came, she whispered, voice trembling. Sahel's reply was quiet but steady. I knew they would. The men dismounted, snow crunching beneath their boots. Sheriff Grant led them, his coat drawn tight against the cold. Behind him came 2 ranchers and the drunk from the saloon, his arms still bound in cloth. Their faces were pale, not from cold but fear disguised as righteousness. Sahel moved to the fire, stoking it with deliberate calm. Stay inside, he said. No, Elena said, standing. They came for me as much as for you. He turned, his eyes dark and unwavering. If you go out there, they'll use your kindness against you. I won't hide, she said. Not again. The knock rattled the door. Grant's voice followed, low and weary. Open up, Sahel. We don't want blood, but you've got to let the girl come home. Sahel's jaw tightened. This is her home. The sheriff sighed, boots shifting in the snow. You know the town. They think you stole her. Elena stepped forward, voice rising before she realized. He saved me. The door creaked open before Sahel could stop her. The cold rushed in, biting her skin. She stood in the doorway, hair wild from sleep, cheeks flushed from the fire's warmth. The men's eyes widened as if seeing something both scandalous and holy. "She's with you," one of them muttered, spitting into the snow. "You filthy—" Grant cut him off. "That's enough." His gaze softened when it fell on her. "Miss May, you can come back to town. You'll be safe." Elena shook her head.
Safe?
"From what?" "From the same people who turned me out to freeze." The drunk sneered. "Ain't right, a white girl shacking up with a savage." The insult struck like a whip. Sahel stepped forward into the light spilling from the cabin. Bare-chested, calm, his breath fogging in the air, he looked like something carved from the storm itself. "Words mean little to the snow," he said. "It buries the cruel and the kind just the same." The drunk raised his rifle. "Then you can be buried first." "Don't!" Grant barked, but the man fired. The shot tore through the stillness, splitting air, echoing off trees. Elena screamed. The bullet missed Sahel by inches, striking the post beside the door, splintering wood into dust. Before anyone could breathe, Sahel had his bow drawn, the arrow's tip glinting like frost. "Put it down," Grant ordered, but Sahel didn't move. His arm was steady, his voice low. "You came here thinking justice was yours. Leave now, before the snow writes your names in red." The drunk's courage wavered. He lowered his gun, muttering curses that sounded more like prayers. Grant stepped forward, gloved hands raised. "No one needs to die today." "Then let her live," Sahel said. The sheriff's eyes shifted to Elena. She stood trembling, not from cold but from the weight of what she had to say. "I choose to stay," she said clearly. "With him." The men exchanged uneasy glances. One spat again, another looked away. The sheriff's shoulders sagged. "You sure about that, Miss May?" "Yes," she whispered. "I've been unwanted all my life, Sheriff. But here, for the first time, I'm not invisible." The wind rose, carrying her words through the clearing like a vow. Grant studied her a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "Then I reckon that's the end of it." He turned to the others. "Mount up." The ranchers hesitated, anger simmering beneath their shame. "You're just gonna leave her with him?" Grant's tone hardened. "She's made her choice. Ain't law enough in this snow to fight love." They muttered, but obeyed. The drunk lingered last, eyes darting between Sahel's bow and Elena's defiant stance. He spat one final time, then turned and stumbled after the others. When the sound of hooves faded, the forest breathed again. The tension that had gripped the air slowly unraveled. Sahel lowered his bow. The arrow dropped softly into the snow. Elena stood in the doorway, chest rising and falling fast. He looked at her. No smile, no triumph, only quiet understanding. "You could have left," he said. "I would have frozen again," she replied. "Only this time from the inside." He stepped closer, brushing his fingers against her wrist, his touch light as snow. "You have fire in you," he said. "But it burns kind." Her eyes shimmered. "And you? What burns in you?" He hesitated. "Hope," he said finally. "Because you stayed." She let out a small laugh, half relief, half disbelief. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting gold over the snow. The cabin behind them glowed like a lantern in the wilderness. Grant's party was already gone down the trail, their figures fading into white. For a long time, Elena and Sahel stood without speaking, the world around them still as prayer. When she finally did speak, her voice was soft but sure. "They'll talk forever, you know." He nodded. "Let them. Snow forgets faster than men." She smiled faintly, tilting her face toward the light. "Then let it forget everything but this morning." He reached out, brushing his knuckles along her cheek. The gesture held more tenderness than any words could carry. The storm had passed, yet its echo lingered, the kind that changes how silence sounds. Behind them, the fire crackled inside the cabin, waiting. She looked up at him, eyes bright, and whispered, "If the world asks who I am, tell them I was the woman the snow tried to bury, but the snow failed." He looked at her for a long, quiet moment, then took her hand. Together, they stepped back inside as the wind began to rise again, gentler this time, as if bowing to them. Outside, the first sunlight touched the peaks, turning the snow to gold. The forest stood still listening, while far below, the town bell rang, thin, distant, fading into the endless white, where love had found its stand and the storm at last knelt in silence.